SUA banned HOA from my guard geese. My pond was registered wildlife habitat. Why would an HOA want access to someone else's guard geese? And what difference could it make if the pond they lived around was registered wildlife habitat? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We are glad to have you here for another story about property, boundaries, and unexpected conflict. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the stories coming next. Thank you for watching, supporting the channel, and spending part of your day with us. Your continued support truly means a lot. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Let's get into the story. Keep your hand off that red gate, Rebecca, because the moment you open it, this stops being an HOA inspection and becomes something your board will have to explain. Rebecca Sloan froze with her fingers inches from the latch, her expression tightening as two Willow Creek compliance representatives stood behind her, holding clipboards and measuring equipment. Beyond me, morning fog drifted across the 4-acre pond, softening the willow trees along the shoreline. Cattails whispered in the breeze, water tapped gently against the reeds, and several geese near the far bank lifted their heads and called across the open water. Rebecca raised a white compliance notice. "We are here to document the animals and inspect pond conditions." "You scheduled yourselves?" I said. "I never gave you permission to enter. These geese are creating neighborhood complaints. Complaints do not give you access to private property. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 48 years old, and the 31 acres behind that gate had belonged to my family long before Willow Creek Estates existed. The farmhouse sat uphill beneath old maples. The pond stretched behind the barn, bordered by wet grass, cattails, and a shallow marshy shelf where ducks, frogs, turtles, and migrating birds appeared throughout the year. The geese were part of that landscape. Some stayed around the pond often enough that neighbors jokingly called them my guard geese because they became noisy whenever unfamiliar people approached the shoreline. I never trained them to confront anyone. I never needed to. Rebecca apparently thought the nickname was enough to classify them as a security problem. "Your animals do not stay inside your property line," she said. "Neither do wild birds. That is exactly why community safety gives us standing. Standing is something you prove with documents, not something you announce at my gate." One of the compliance representatives looked down at his clipboard. Rebecca did not. She stepped closer and pointed toward the pond. "We need photographs, measurements, sanitation documentation, and access to the shoreline." I glanced toward the old metal survey pin in the grass beside the red gate. 12 feet beyond it, Willow Creek property began. Rebecca had walked past that pin more than once without asking what it marked. Farther down the pond trail stood a numbered green habitat sign mounted on a weathered post. She had photographed that too. "No one from your association is entering today," I said. "Then you are formally refusing inspection." "I am refusing your inspection." The distinction irritated her. Before she could answer, tires crunched over gravel behind us. A dark green government vehicle turned from the county road into my driveway. Rebecca looked over her shoulder. Another vehicle followed several seconds later. The geese called again from the cattails, their voices carrying across the water. Rebecca's confidence returned almost instantly. "Did someone report this property to wildlife authorities?" she asked. "Not exactly." The first vehicle stopped inside the driveway. A woman wearing a state wildlife field jacket stepped out carrying a document case. Rebecca glanced from her to me, then toward the pond. "Good," she said. "Perhaps they can finally clarify this." I looked past her at the numbered habitat sign standing beside the reeds, then back at the compliance notice in her hand. That is precisely why they are here. 3 months earlier, the pond had been the quietest place on my property. I was standing near the western bank just after sunrise, writing water levels in my pond logbook, when I first noticed Rebecca Sloan walking along the eastern fence. The air smelled of damp soil and wet grass. Willow leaves moved softly above the shoreline, and a pair of geese floated through a ribbon of morning mist while several others searched for food near the cattails. My 31 acres were never designed to impress anyone. The farmhouse was old, the barn needed paint, and the gravel driveway collected puddles every spring. But the 4-acre pond had been there since my grandfather restored the low ground decades earlier, and over time the shallow edges became habitat for more wildlife than I could count. Ducks nested near the reeds. Herons visited before dawn. Frogs filled summer evenings with noise. The geese came and went according to season, although a small group returned often enough that I recognized their habits. Then Willow Creek Estates appeared east of U.S. Where there had once been pasture, developers built sidewalks, ornamental trees, decorative entrance columns, and rows of large houses. I had no problem with any of it. Their land was theirs. Mine was mine. The recorded subdivision boundary ended beyond the old survey pin near my red gate, and I had never signed an HOA membership agreement, paid dues, or voted in one of their elections. Rebecca apparently considered those details negotiable. Daniel Mercer? She called through the fence. That is me. Rebecca Sloan, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She wore a pale blue blouse, tailored slacks, and sunglasses despite the weak morning sun. A thick association binder rested against her hip. We have received complaints about your geese. I looked toward the pond. Which geese? She seemed surprised by the question. The ones you keep for security. I do not keep security geese. Residents call them guard geese. Residents can call them accountants. That does not make them accountants. Her mouth tightened. A goose called from the water, and another answered from the cattails. Rebecca looked toward them. They become aggressive when people approach. They become noisy around unfamiliar activity. That is normal behavior. They have been observed near Willow Creek property. Wildlife moves. Rebecca opened her binder. Our nuisance animal rules address noise, sanitation, and potential safety issues on property governed by your association. I walked toward the red gate and pointed at the old metal survey pin half hidden in the grass. Your subdivision begins over there. Rebecca barely looked at it. Animals do not understand HOA boundaries. Your authority is supposed to. For a moment, the only sound between us was water moving through reeds. Then she noticed the numbered green sign farther down the shoreline. Its paint had faded slightly, but the wildlife habitat emblem remained visible beneath years of sun and rain. What is that sign? She asked. Part of the pond records. I did not elaborate. Beside my pond logbook back at the farmhouse sat a green state envelope containing maps and registration documents that had mattered very little until that morning. Rebecca lifted her phone and photographed the shoreline. The habitat sign appeared clearly in the frame. So did the red gate, and, if she had looked carefully enough, the survey pin. She lowered the phone. We may need to inspect this area. Then first show me where Willow Creek acquired authority over it. Rebecca closed her binder. You will receive something in writing. She walked back toward the subdivision without another question. I watched her disappear beyond the fence while the geese settled quietly onto the pond. At the time, I thought she would check the county map and realize her mistake. Instead, 4 days later, the first violation notice arrived. The first notice accused me of 3 things at once: excessive animal noise, improper wildlife management, and maintaining what Rebecca called an unapproved security animal system near a residential community. I read that last phrase twice at my kitchen table while rain tapped softly against the windows. Apparently, a few geese standing beside a pond had become a security system because somebody inside Willow Creek had given them a nickname. The notice demanded corrective action within 14 days and assigned my property a Willow Creek compliance number that did not appear anywhere on my deed. I answered the next morning. I enclosed a copy of my county parcel map, highlighted the subdivision boundary, and explained that my 31 acres were not governed by the association. I also asked Rebecca to provide any recorded document establishing Willow Creek authority over my land. She never sent one. Instead, 9 days later, a second envelope arrived. This time the allegations included sanitation concerns around the pond, uncontrolled animal activity, and possible shoreline maintenance violations. Rebecca requested access for a visual inspection. I declined. Then I did something she apparently did not expect. I called the county wildlife office myself. A field officer named Michael Harris visited the following week after reviewing the complaint. I opened the red gate before his truck had finished rolling to a stop. We walked the pond together beneath a hot July sun while dragonflies skimmed the water and cattails clicked softly in the breeze. Michael examined the shoreline, asked about the geese, reviewed my pond logbook, and checked the habitat registration information I kept on file. He watched the birds from a distance and noted that the pond supported multiple species, not just geese. You are not operating some kind of train guard flock? He asked, almost smiling. Only if the frogs are part of the operation. He laughed, and wrote something on his form. By the end of the visit, he found no condition requiring the corrective action Rebecca had demanded. He did remind me that legitimate wildlife and habitat rules still applied, which I already knew. That was the difference Rebecca never seemed to understand. I had no problem with oversight from people who actually possessed authority. I had a problem with an HOA inventing authority because my pond happened to sit near their houses. I sent Rebecca a copy of Michael's findings that afternoon. Her reply came the following morning. She wrote that the county review did not resolve Willow Creek's independent community concerns. Independent community concerns. I stared at those words while the coffee cooled beside me. She had requested professional review, received professional review, and dismissed it because the result did not support her inspection demand. After that, Rebecca began appearing along the eastern boundary more often. She photographed the pond from the public side of the fence, sometimes alone and sometimes with another board member. One afternoon she captured the red gate, the old survey pin, 3 geese near the cattails, and the numbered habitat sign in a single photograph. Later, that exact image appeared attached to another compliance email. She had unknowingly documented every detail that would eventually matter. I printed the email and placed it in a folder beside the earlier notices. Then I opened my desk drawer. Inside were the green state envelope, the recorded habitat maps, my pond logbook, and copies of the subdivision plat. I could have shown Rebecca everything right then, but she still had not answered the question I had asked from the beginning. Before I explained why the pond carried that numbered habitat sign, I wanted Willow Creek to explain something much simpler. Why did they believe they had any right to regulate my property at all? By early August, Rebecca had stopped calling the pond a nuisance and started calling it a liability. The distinction mattered because every new word appeared in another official-looking letter. One Monday morning, I found a certified envelope wedged inside my mailbox before the dew had dried from the grass. Willow Creek now demanded access to inspect shoreline sanitation, animal activity, water conditions, and what Rebecca described as unauthorized habitat management adjacent to association property. I carried the letter down to the pond and read it beside the red gate. The geese were scattered across the water, barely making a sound. A great blue heron stood near the cattails, perfectly still beneath the willow branches. Nothing about the scene resembled the emergency described on Rebecca's letterhead. I answered exactly as I had before. I included Michael Harris's wildlife inspection findings, another copy of my deed, and the county parcel map. I asked again for proof of Willow Creek jurisdiction. Rebecca responded by inviting me to the August board meeting. When I arrived at the clubhouse, photographs of my pond were already projected onto a large screen. Rebecca stood at the front with her binder open. Mr. Mercer's property presents unresolved concerns affecting Willow Creek residents, she told the room. He has repeatedly denied association representatives access. I waited until she finished. Then she displayed a public conservation record connected to my property. We have also learned that the pond participates in a registered habitat program. That creates additional questions regarding management and accountability. Several residents turned toward me. Rebecca seemed pleased, as though she had finally found the weakness she needed. I raised my hand. Accountability to whom? To agencies involved with the habitat, certainly, but also to the surrounding community. Michael Harris already inspected the property. That does not eliminate Willow Creek concerns. Then show me where Willow Creek acquired authority over my parcel. The room went quiet. Rebecca glanced toward another board member. Our management company is reviewing the boundary documentation. You have been sending enforcement notices for almost 2 months, and you are only now reviewing whether you can enforce anything? A man seated near the aisle looked down at the printed agenda. Rebecca changed the slide. There it was again, her photograph of my pond. 3 geese stood beside the reeds. The red gate appeared along one edge. Near the center, clearly visible behind the cattails, was the numbered green habitat sign. She had enlarged the evidence and still had not understood it. The issue, Rebecca said, is cooperation. I cooperated with the wildlife officer because he had legitimate authority. What I have not done is pretend your binder gives you access to land your association may not govern. Rebecca ended the discussion shortly afterward. I drove home beneath a sky heavy with summer clouds. Inside the farmhouse, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. The pond logbook lay on top, its cover stained from years of damp hands and muddy truck seats. Beneath it were survey maps and the green state envelope. I opened that envelope for the first time in several years. Inside were the habitat registration documents, mapped wetland boundaries, correspondence, and access procedures connected to the pond and its shoreline. I read every page again, then found the contact information for Emily Foster, the state wildlife coordinator who had handled the registration records. I called her the next morning. After hearing the situation, she asked me to email Rebecca's inspection demands and photographs. 20 minutes after receiving them, Emily called back. "Daniel, they cannot simply declare themselves authorized habitat inspectors." That is what I thought. Has the HOA proven your parcel is inside its jurisdiction? Not yet. There was a brief silence. Then they may have two separate problems. I looked through the window toward the pond, where the green habitat sign stood among the reeds. Can you bring the original registration file if they schedule another inspection? Absolutely. I closed Rebecca's latest notice and placed it beside the green envelope. She thought discovering the habitat registration had strengthened her position. What she did not understand was that she had just found the first document that would begin dismantling it. 2 days later, Rebecca sent the notice I had been expecting. Willow Creek representatives would arrive Thursday at 9 in the morning for what she called a formal environmental and animal compliance inspection. She listed the pond, shoreline, geese, habitat signage, water conditions, and my management records as areas subject to review. At the bottom, she warned that continued refusal could lead to escalating association penalties. I read the notice at my kitchen table while rainwater dripped from my boots onto the old floorboards. Then I called Emily Foster. "Thursday morning," I said. 9 o'clock. "I will be there before them," she replied. "Do not authorize association access." "I will not." That evening, I spread every document across the dining table. Michael Harris's inspection report sat beside my deed. The green state envelope lay open next to habitat maps showing the 4-acre pond, the cattail shelf, and the wetland edge. My pond logbook contained years of water levels, seasonal bird observations, shoreline maintenance notes, and dates when invasive plants had been removed. Nothing dramatic, just patient records from someone who actually cared about the land Rebecca kept describing as neglected. Then I unfolded the county subdivision plat. The Willow Creek boundary stopped east of my red gate. The old survey pin matched the recorded line. I had sent Rebecca enough information to recognize that months earlier. She had continued anyway. The next morning, I walked the pond before sunrise. Fog hovered over the water, and damp grass soaked the bottoms of my jeans. Several geese rested near the reeds while another pair drifted silently toward the western bank. I stopped beside the numbered green habitat sign. Mud had splashed across the lower half, so I wiped it clean with an old towel. The registration number appeared beneath the state wildlife emblem. Rebecca had photographed that sign at least 4 times. In one board presentation, she had projected it 10 feet tall on a clubhouse wall without understanding what she was showing everyone. I almost laughed at the thought, but there was nothing funny about the inspection notice folded inside my jacket. Emily called around noon. She had reviewed the original habitat file. "The registration is active," she said. "The mapped habitat includes the pond and wetland margin. Any legitimate agency review follows established procedures. An HOA cannot turn itself into a wildlife authority by writing an inspection letter." Rebecca will argue that the habitat does not override association rules. She would be correct about that. I appreciated the answer because it was precise. Which brings us back to whether those rules apply to my parcel. Exactly. I looked toward the red gate. 12 feet beyond where Rebecca usually stood, Willow Creek property began. That distance had never changed. "Bring the original registration file," I said. "I will bring the recorded maps too." Wednesday evening, I placed everything into 2 folders. One contained the habitat documents. The other contained my deed, subdivision plat, correspondence, and every notice Rebecca had issued. The geese called across the pond as the sun dropped behind the farmhouse, their voices echoing through the cattails before fading into the evening air. Rebecca believed Thursday would finally force me to cooperate. She did not realize I had been cooperating from the beginning, just with the people who actually had authority. By 9 o'clock the next morning, she was going to learn the difference between being concerned about someone else's property and having a legal right to control it. Thursday morning arrived under a thin layer of fog, and by 8:45 I was standing beside the red gate with both folders tucked under my arm. The The pond smelled of wet grass and cool mud. Willow branches moved above the shoreline, and the geese were scattered across the water as if nothing important was happening. Emily Foster arrived first in a dark green state vehicle. She stepped out carrying the original habitat file and a rolled map case. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning." She looked toward the numbered sign beside the cattails. "That is the original marker?" "Same one Rebecca has photographed repeatedly." Emily smiled faintly. "Then this should be straightforward." At exactly 9, Rebecca's silver sport utility vehicle turned into the driveway, followed by another car carrying 2 Willow Creek compliance representatives. She stepped out with her blue binder pressed against her side. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I assume you understand we are here pursuant to the inspection notice." "I understand what your notice says." Her eyes moved to Emily. "And you are?" Emily introduced herself and explained that she represented the state wildlife program connected to the registered habitat. Rebecca's expression changed only slightly. "Excellent. Then perhaps you can observe our inspection." "That depends," Emily said. "What authority are you conducting it under?" Rebecca opened her binder. "Willow Creek has documented concerns involving animals, sanitation, shoreline conditions, and community safety." "Those are concerns," Emily replied. "I asked about authority." For the first time that morning, Rebecca hesitated. Then she pointed toward the pond. "The habitat registration does not exempt Mr. Mercer from legitimate community regulations." "Correct," Emily said. Rebecca looked almost relieved. "Then we agree." "Not entirely. Registered habitat does not create immunity from valid laws or valid private obligations, but it also does not grant your association independent authority to inspect protected habitat. Agency access follows established procedures." I watched Rebecca glance toward the green sign. Emily walked to it, brushed moisture from the face, and read the registration number aloud. Then she opened the original file. The same number appeared on the first page beside a mapped outline of my pond and wetland margin. Rebecca stared at the documents. "We were not informed this designation restricted access. The sign you photographed identifies the program," I said. "You could have asked." One compliance representative lowered his clipboard. Rebecca recovered quickly. "Fine. We will conduct our review from outside the registered habitat boundary." "There is still another issue," I said. She turned toward me. I opened the second folder but did not remove the county plat yet. "Before anyone measures anything, show me the document proving my parcel belongs to Willow Creek." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Our management company has been reviewing that." "For how long?" She did not answer. "You issued multiple violation notices, threatened penalties, demanded inspections, and presented my property at a board meeting before confirming jurisdiction. The subdivision borders your land." "Borders?" I let the words sit between us while water moved softly through the reeds. A goose called from the far bank. Emily closed the habitat file. Rebecca looked from her binder to the red gate, then toward the old survey pin half visible in the grass. I finally unfolded the county plat across the hood of my truck. "You were right about one thing," I told her. "The habitat registration does not decide whether HOA rules apply to me." I placed my finger on the recorded subdivision line. "This does." My finger rested on the black boundary line while Rebecca leaned closer to the county plat. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The morning breeze lifted one corner of the paper, and Emily held it flat against the truck hood. "Here is Willow Creek Estates," I said, tracing the recorded subdivision boundary. "And here is my parcel." The 2 compliance representatives stepped closer. Rebecca adjusted her sunglasses and studied the map. "That line could represent an easement." "It does not." I pointed toward the grass beside the red gate. "The physical survey marker is right there." We walked 12 feet toward the old metal pin I had shown her months earlier. Damp grass brushed against my boots as I stopped beside it. "This is where the recorded Willow Creek boundary ends." Rebecca looked back toward the gate. The distance suddenly seemed much larger than 12 feet. "Our association has historically addressed conditions affecting neighboring properties," she said. "Addressing a concern is not the same as enforcing covenants," I replied. I opened my folder and removed my deed. There is no Willow Creek covenant attached to this parcel. I have never signed an association agreement. I have never paid Willow Creek dues. I have never received voting rights. My property was never annexed into your subdivision." Emily remained quiet. She did not need to say anything. This part had nothing to do with wildlife law. Rebecca turned toward one of the compliance representatives. Call the management office. He stepped aside with his phone. While we waited, I opened another section of the folder. Every notice Rebecca had mailed me was arranged by date. Noise violation. Sanitation warning. Animal compliance demand. Shoreline inspection notice. Threatened penalties. Each document carried the same parcel reference number Willow Creek had created internally. None carried a recorded covenant proving jurisdiction. The representative returned several minutes later looking uncomfortable. They are checking the property file. Rebecca frowned. Checking what? Whether there is an annexation record. There should be. They have not located one. The geese called from the pond, and the sound rolled across the cattails. Rebecca stared toward the water, then at the green habitat marker she had photographed so many times. This still does not resolve complaints from residents, she said. No, I answered. Residents can still complain. They can contact the county. They can contact wildlife officials. They can speak to me. What Willow Creek cannot do is manufacture jurisdiction because complaining feels slower than enforcement. Emily opened the habitat file again. And regarding this pond, any wildlife or habitat concerns can be referred through the proper channels. That process already exists. Rebecca closed her binder. For the first time since she had started visiting my fence, she had nothing ready to read from it. Then the compliance representative's phone rang. He answered, listened, and looked directly at Rebecca. The management company found an email from their legal review, he said. When? Rebecca asked. 3 weeks ago. My attention sharpened. What did it say? He hesitated before answering. It recommended suspending enforcement until Willow Creek confirmed whether Mr. Mercer's parcel was actually subject to the association covenants. Rebecca's face went still. 3 weeks. That meant the recommendation had arrived before the board meeting, before her latest inspection demand, and before the threat of escalating penalties. I looked at the stack of notices in my folder, then at Rebecca. The boundary mistake was no longer the only problem. Someone had warned her to verify her authority, and she had continued anyway. Rebecca did not answer immediately. The blue binder stayed closed against her side, while the compliance representative pulled up the management company email on his phone. Morning sunlight had begun burning through the fog, revealing the pond behind us in sharp detail. The green habitat sign stood beside the cattails. The old survey pin sat 12 feet from the red gate. Everything Rebecca needed to understand the limits of her authority had been visible for months. Read the recommendation, I said. The representative glanced at Rebecca, then back at his screen. Legal review recommends that all enforcement activity concerning the Mercer parcel be suspended until recorded covenant jurisdiction and annexation status are verified. And when was that sent? 3 weeks ago, Tuesday afternoon. I remembered that Tuesday. 2 days later, Rebecca had presented photographs of my pond at the board meeting. The following week, she had sent the formal inspection demand and warned me about escalating penalties. Did the management company receive any confirmation afterward? I asked. He scrolled through the message thread. No recorded annexation document is attached here. Rebecca finally spoke. We were dealing with ongoing resident concerns. Waiting indefinitely was not reasonable. Nobody asked you to wait indefinitely, I said. Your own legal review asked you to verify jurisdiction before continuing enforcement. Emily closed her habitat file and looked toward the pond. From the wildlife side, there was already a legitimate inspection. Michael Harris documented the conditions. If additional agency review had been necessary, there was a process for that too. Rebecca looked at her. So you are saying the association had no right to raise concerns? No, Emily replied. I am saying raising concerns and claiming inspection authority are different things. That distinction had been the entire conflict from the beginning. I opened my folder and placed Rebecca's notices beside the county plat on the truck hood, arranging them by date. The paper trail told the story without any argument from me. The first complaint, my parcel map. The second warning, Michael's inspection, my deed. The legal recommendation to suspend enforcement. The board presentation. The inspection demand. The threatened penalties. Rebecca stared at the documents. What happens now? One of the compliance representatives asked. From my side, Emily said, nothing changes. Daniel remains responsible for following the habitat program requirements, and legitimate wildlife concerns can still be reported through established channels. I nodded. And from Willow Creek's side, I want every notice withdrawn until you can produce a recorded document proving my land belongs to your association. Rebecca started to respond, but the representative beside her spoke first. We should leave this for counsel. That was the first sensible sentence I had heard from Willow Creek in weeks. They returned to their vehicles without crossing the red gate. Rebecca paused beside the survey pin and looked down at it for several seconds. The marker she had ignored was suddenly impossible to overlook. By noon, I received an email from Willow Creek's management company confirming that enforcement activity had been suspended pending legal review. The next afternoon, another message arrived. Their records contained no annexation agreement for my parcel. No recorded covenant tied my land to Willow Creek. No dues history existed because I had never been a member. I read the email twice, then carried it down to the pond. The geese drifted near the reeds while willow leaves moved across the water. Rebecca had spent months trying to prove that wildlife could cross a property line. In the end, the line that mattered was the one her own authority had never crossed. 3 weeks later, Willow Creek mailed me a certified letter that was noticeably thinner than the envelopes Rebecca used to send. I opened it at the same kitchen table where this whole paper war had begun. Every compliance notice concerning my pond, shoreline, and geese was formally withdrawn. Every threatened penalty was voided. The association acknowledged that my 31-acre parcel had never been annexed into Willow Creek Estates and was not subject to its covenants. I read the final sentence twice, then placed the letter beside the green state envelope. There was no celebration, no dramatic confrontation, just paper correcting what other paper had tried to invent. The board held a special meeting the following week. I attended because my property had been discussed publicly, and I wanted the correction recorded just as publicly. Their attorney explained that future enforcement required jurisdiction verification before notices could be issued to neighboring parcels. Rebecca sat near the end of the table with her blue binder closed. She did not argue when the board reassigned compliance oversight pending an internal review. A month later, she stepped down as president. I never learned whether the decision was entirely hers, and I never cared enough to ask. What mattered was simpler. Willow Creek stopped treating my boundary like a suggestion. Autumn arrived slowly after that. The cattails turned brown around the pond, maple leaves gathered beside the red gate, and cool mornings covered the water with silver mist. The numbered habitat sign remained where it had always been. Emily Foster sent updated habitat paperwork, and Michael Harris stopped by once during a routine visit. Nothing about the legitimate oversight bothered me. I kept the pond logbook current, maintained the shoreline according to the habitat requirements, and continued treating the property exactly as I had before Rebecca decided it belonged inside her binder. Something unexpected happened with the neighbors too. A couple from Willow Creek asked whether native plants might help the wet corner behind their backyard. Another resident wanted to know why herons visited my pond so often. I answered their questions because they came as neighbors, not authorities. Even the geese became less controversial once nobody was using them as an excuse for jurisdiction. They still called whenever unfamiliar vehicles came down the driveway. They still wandered between the reeds and open water. Sometimes they crossed toward the far edge of the pond, completely indifferent to the invisible lines humans had drawn on maps. One cold morning, I stood beside the old survey pin with coffee warming my hands. The red gate creaked softly behind me. Across the pond, a goose called through the fog, and another answered from somewhere beyond the cattails. I thought about all those notices, photographs, meetings, and inspection demands. Rebecca had spent months insisting that wildlife could not be trusted to respect boundaries. She was right about that much. Geese do not read deeds. Herons do not study subdivision plats. Ducks do not care where an association begins or ends. But people claiming authority do not get that excuse. The habitat sign had protected a process. The green envelope had documented the pond. The logbook had documented my stewardship. The survey pin had marked the line. And the notices Rebecca kept sending after she had been warned to verify jurisdiction documented something else entirely. I never needed to outshout her. I only needed to keep every record, answer legitimate authority, and wait for the paperwork to catch up with the truth. Justice did not arrive with noise from the boardroom. It arrived quietly, one verified document at a time, while the pond remained exactly where it had always been.